So welcome everyone. Welcome to the 5th edition of EPHA's Access to Medicines Dialogues. This is a series of online events we launched back in October on various access to medicines related topics, bringing together key stakeholders, trying, as we're going to try to do now, trying to really every time articulate a set of recommendations, a set of clear ideas and asks as to how future trends, topics, initiatives should be shaped. And it is a great pleasure to be joined tonight by Marie-Paul Kenny. It is an honor to have you online. Marie-Paul Kenny, she has multiple capacities. She's currently the Director of Research with INSERM, the French National Institute for Health and Biomedical Research. But at the same time, she is the chair of the board of the Medicines Patent Pool, as well as, among other things, the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, DNDi. And of course, I think we will touch upon both those organizations in during our conversation. And by Michel Goldman. Michel Goldman is a very well-known figure, not only in Belgium, not only in Brussels. He was the first director of the Innovative Medicines Initiative, the IMI, from 2009 to 2014, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michel. He's a doctor. He's a Belgian doctor. He's a professor at Université Libre de Bruxelles, at ULB, professor of pharmacotherapy and immunotherapy, immunology. And at the same time, the founder and co-director of the Institute for Interdisciplinary Innovation in Healthcare here in Belgium. You can always ask your questions in the Q&A room, and of course the session is in the Q&A room, and the session is always recorded, and you can find this session and the previous webinars on the EPHA YouTube channel. So without further ado, I would like to start by asking Marie-Paul Kenny, the COVID-19 has gotten governments in Europe to think about research and development in a very speedy manner over the past few months. But now that we're almost at the end of this year, what are the lessons learned? How has Europe fared and delivered when it comes to the R&D? What is your feeling?
Well, I think that Europe has paid the price of not being prepared on the level of the R&D. Indeed, yes, of course, we have very large European 2020 programs, and we have planning, and it's all research program, and it's all well and organized. But this is not something that can be adapted easily in time of crisis. And indeed, although, as we know, the Commission has done their best, at the time, not at the beginning, but when all Europe decided that it was better to come along together than to go each country on its own, they have done their best in order to speed up the investment into research. But it's not like in the US, where actually you have an agency which is a state agency, and which has all authority, which has a budget, large budget, and all authority to decide to one day to another where it has to invest, and doesn't have to demonstrate and to consult too many stakeholders to make investment decisions. And thanks to that, actually, what has happened is something that nobody was expected would happen, because a year ago, not a year ago, but a bit less than that, when I was asked, when do I think that at the quickest we could have a vaccine, I said, 12, 18 months, and this was already a miracle. But indeed, thanks to the considerable investment and the preparedness that the US had for research and development to combat emergencies, health threats, would they be infectious diseases, but also poisoning, but also radioactive. All this is covered by BARDA. They were ready to invest from one day to another very large amounts of money into companies with whom many of them had already worked for years in preparing for other threats. So this is how the US managed to leverage, actually, because of course all this started from the US and then a huge investment by the US government, but this has leveraged investment by many other stakeholders. But I think that without the pull that the US investment has had on the overall ecosystem, we wouldn't be there today saying that the UK will start rolling a vaccine today, has started actually today.
If I hear you, if I understand you correctly, without the US, we wouldn't be here where we are today.
No.
We wouldn't, no. That's a very clear answer. And Michel, what do you think?
Well, I would say that also without Europe, we would not be there. Well, my comment will be the following. First, we were supposed to be ready. I recommend that you have a look at the Cordis website and you look at all the programs since the first start SARS epidemics in the early 2000s. You will see a number of programs supported by the research framework program from the Commission, supposed to prepare ourselves to the next pandemic. So what has happened? I think that in terms of research, we are doing quite well, both in academia and in biotech. Just think about the University of Oxford. I know that UK is not really anymore in the European Union, but they were heavily supported by the framework programs at the time. And just think about BioNTech, that's also a German company, and CureVac is coming, it's also European. But I think that where we are really falling short is in the translation from the early phase of development in academia or even in small biotech to big manufacturers, which for such a pandemic obviously have like a monopoly because they are the only one able to deploy the vaccines, to build the plans, to take the financial risks and all these things. And I think that's a pity because we have some large companies. Just think about AstraZeneca, just think about Sanofi, even GSK. And it was quite remarkable to make the link with what Marie-Paule said, that both CEOs of Sanofi and AstraZeneca mentioned that they had to go to the US, they had to go to BARDA to find the public support they were looking for. So I think that our science is certainly excellent. In my view, as good as in the US. I think our regulatory agencies are excellent. That's at least in my perspective, and actually they are working closely with FDA, but there is something lacking in terms of bringing the products rapidly to the citizens and to the patients.
You're both very clear. It gets me thinking that now COVID-19 is a catalyst. It really accelerates and perhaps really paves the way for public-private partnerships. And I think you're both kind of implying that this is the way forward. Are member states ready to follow? I mean, today's webinar, our discussion today is to really set out a set of recommendations on how this HERA, at the time when we first named this webinar, there was no name yet, so I called it the EU BARDA. Today we have a name for it. It's the Health Emergency Response Authority. Are member states ready to follow? Can they afford not to follow? What do you think, Marie-Paule?
Well, you know, first I would like to say, just because you said it's European BARDA, to come up, you know, to put clearly that BARDA is not a public-private partnership. BARDA is a public agency dependent from the Ministry of Health. And in addition to BARDA, by the way, the US had put in place already with Ebola, a system by which there is extraordinary coordination between the health agencies in the US. So there's not only BARDA, but there's also NIH, there's CDC, and they all communicate and they try to position themselves. But BARDA is not a public-private organization. It's a public, purely public institution, which seals deal and finances industry. And this is, and in my opinion, this is what, if we want to do something to emulate the type of agency and efficacy that we have seen with BARDA, I think this is the type of engagement that we should be discussing. You know, and coming out of BARDA, but I don't think it's dependent actually on BARDA. I should look at the structure. Was also Operation Warp Speed, which was the brainchild of the President of the United States, I guess, to have you know, an armed arm that would be able to go with the speed of light and develop these vaccines even more quickly. It is a public-driven organization with a lot of money, which finances big companies, and this is why they all go to the US to get the funding. Because I agree with Michel. What he said is that we, you know, there's a lot of research and good research in Europe, and indeed BioNTech and CureVac are all European biotech companies, but there was nobody to pay to have the scale up that was needed for to respond to COVID. So, you know, we have to see how much the member states in Europe will want to go forward. But I would think that, well, I hope at least that if they consider that it is a good idea and that Europe needs a BARDA, that they will duly consider that it is their money that they need to invest, and not pretend that they will ask, you know, the industry to invest, and they will just, you know, sort of be part of a public-private partnership. If you want to have something like that, it will cost money, and a lot of money.
Michel, do you think that member states, first of all, thank you, Marie-Paul, also for this key clarification. Obviously, it's a very important clarification. But Michel, do you think that member states are ready to go down the path that Marie-Paul just described? What is your feeling?
Well, I'm not sure they are ready at this time. I hope they will realize that that's the way to go. The reason why I'm doubtful is the following. If you look at what the European Commission did as recommendation since, you know, March, April, the European Commission made recommendation on how to prepare the lockdown exit, the lifting of containment. They produce recommendation about testing and tracing. They produce, I think, 2 other recommendations. And still, if you look what has happened in the member states, we didn't really follow. It's like they didn't even look at the recommendation, with perhaps one exception, but the exception, I would say, didn't need the European recommendation to decide of its policy, Germany. So my concern is that certainly Germany decides about a policy which proved to be relatively efficient, at least more efficient than the others. I think that Germany invests in developing tests and in developing treatments. And you see what they do now to prepare the deployment and the distribution of vaccines. So they have been much more proactive for a number of reasons. So I think that the question now is whether other countries, and I'm especially thinking about France, of course, would indeed partner with Germany to say, okay, let's continue the way you did, but let's do it together, with one example which is positive, and Marie-Paul already alluded to what has been done in terms of pre-ordering vaccine, advanced procurements. But, you know, to some extent, it means that Europe is ready to collaborate when it comes to finances, to money, and it's true that we succeed to make the euro together and all these things. And here again, on this, we were able to partner. I think that now we have to go to the next step, which is to partner on other issues. Whether this will work, I don't know. I must say, and Marie-Paule knows this very well, that personally I'm quite sad to see that in each member states, after the pre-orders, there was in each state a national council looking at the vaccines and saying, oh, which vaccine we will order in our country, knowing that obviously there is an European portfolio. But I'm always wondering whether, you know, the best scientists from all over Europe cannot meet together. Why do we have to have separate? It's just an example which explains why I'm not sure that we are ready yet, but I hope that it will come. And I think
but from HERA, now that we're talking about focusing on HERA, Marie-Paule, what would you like to see? What would be on your wish list? Would it be a separate agency? Would it be a network of, I mean, you're heading the research at INSERM. From your experience from international European science collaboration, what would you expect from HERA? What would you like to see?
Well, I think it could be an agency or an organization like ECDC, which is a European Commission child, if I may say, but which has quite a high level of autonomy, which also has a sustainability that many European projects don't have. I think, you know, setting something up under your Horizon Europe and have to reinvent something when we will leave Horizon Europe to go to another horizon, and everything needs to be, you know, you need to reapply for a new round.
Renegotiate.
I think this is not the type of instrument that we need. I would say we would need something with that would be semi-autonomous, with an autonomous budget, but a serious governance, which would be a public governance, because the investment is for public money. And also what we have to see the scope, because indeed, you know, the scope will tell you what type of investment is needed. Because if it's like BARDA, and in the scope of BARDA, you have nuclear attacks, you have poisoning, you have terrorist attacks, and development of any kind of what they call medical countermeasures. In order to tackle all these, this would need a huge budget, and maybe this is not what we need. Maybe we shouldn't try to reinvent BARDA and to copy what BARDA is doing in Europe. Maybe we should try to see what we can have, which is of reasonable size and is a complement.
Michelle, I definitely want to hear your views as well on this. What would make it on your wish list for this HERA, taking into account the strengths and weaknesses of Europe, and what can Europe really aspire to via HERA?
Yeah, let me answer perhaps first on the scope of, you know, of HERA activity. Second, on the governance, and third, I will come back to the sustainability issue. So the scope, I think, should not be too broad for a number of reasons. Also, if we want the citizens, you know, understanding and support this, we must be very clear. I think that it should be around, you know, the infectious threats. And we have two major threats at this time point, which is antimicrobial resistance and pandemics. So there might be others, but I would try at least to, from the start, to combine these two priorities and these two major threats for European citizens. So that's for the scope. Regarding the governance, and I don't know if we will talk about the Innovative Medicines Initiative, there is a new name now, as you know. But I tend to agree with Marie-Paule. I think that we should be transparent. There is nothing wrong in investing public money to provide the means, the incentives to share risks together with the private sector. The point is that, you know, in IMI, we are talking about in-kind contributions. So it means that companies say, but look, we also invest, which is certainly true to some extent, but it's not crystal clear the way this is organized. And I think that it would be much more transparent that indeed we identify first the needs. And I think this is the responsibility of the public sector. And then indeed we have to engage into discussion of with the company, asking and trying to see where is the need for public investment, which are the risks that should be shared, which again which has been done to some extent with these pre-orders. But I think we can have the same reasoning regarding R&D, and I think that's quite important. Knowing that to have more influence of the public sector, so it's not simply to provide money to the publicly funded partners of the industry. Is also to have a serious discussion with the industry. And when I mean by a serious discussion, it means that we need the CEOs around the table. And I can tell you from my experience, this has been one of the issues we were facing, that IMI was a good to have for industry and they did nice things. That's not the issue, but now we have to move to another dimension. And we have not to engage in the so-called pre-competitive research. It's really to develop products that we need for the public health of our citizens. So it's another dimension, and this should be discussed upfront and transparently. And yeah, that's what I would say. So, third, and then I will finish on that, is indeed there should be a long-term vision. Sustainability is critical. You know, in IMI, I launched, I don't know, 65 projects. It was 5 years. Sometimes you can have a 2-year program, but you don't have this long-term vision, which is bad for everyone, including industry. So that's something which I think is critical, as well as flexibility. When something is not working, we should be courageous enough to stop it and to reinvest in something different. I can tell you that with the usual European rules, this is really almost impossible.
Yes, you're both very clear, and I guess it comes down to the question: can the public get its act together and act as a wise investor rather than simply throwing money at the industry, or simply investing in a very early stage research, and which is not then translated into end products. Marie-Paule, on this, on what will the role, because if I hear you, both of you, you're more in the direction favoring the prospect of setting up an agency which is really predominantly a public agency, working, of course, with the industry. But how should this partnership be shaped, the partnership with the industry, that is? Michelle already set out some elements. I would like to have your take on that as well.
Well, you say, you know, I would like to reiterate it. I think that the governance should be only public, and that this new agency should work with the industry, of course, industry of all sizes, the large one, the small one, but also potentially with academic institution, if they have something which is worth it, help them do the translation, then to develop products. As we said, something which is not a rock and roll, and you have EME followed by EHE followed by ET followed by and so on and so forth. You have something that you set up for the duration, and that the people who are put in charge of this organization should be, how do I say, subject to public scrutiny. There should be an evaluation process in terms of seeing whether they deliver. But then beyond that, they should have authority to decide on what they invest in. As Michel said, you have a project, you launch several projects, the one which are not working, you have milestones in the investment. And if it doesn't deliver, if it gets nowhere, then you stop the funding. And the ones in charge should be responsible for handling a portfolio, not for having to ask for permission for each and every project that they start.
Michel, based on also on your experience from the IMI, you were the executive director of the first IMI. Now we are looking at the Innovative Health Initiative, EPHA. How do you see this being? Is this compatible with HERA? Do you think that throughout the years, over the past essentially more than 10 years now, we're moving towards a new model of collaboration? And where does HERA really fit in this picture since the first steps of the IMI?
I think that there are two elements. I think that there is indeed a future for the successor of IMI in different areas. I have not really, perhaps we don't have time to comment on this. The problem is that both for the IMI successor and for HERA, they should be fit for purpose. And I don't think that, for example, if we would like to have IMI taking care of COVID-19, and actually there have been projects, it's not fully fit for purpose. Although we should acknowledge that if you think about Ebola, IMI did wonderful things. I say it very modestly because I was no more the executive director at the time, but clearly if you look at the vaccines that were developed, IMI really play a very real and an important role. Where I don't fully agree with Marie-Paule coming to HERA, I still think that there is an advantage to have representative of the industry in the governance. I think that, and this might be a difference with the US. In the current situation, really the industry will only, and they know the European Union, they know the European Commission, they know our weaknesses, so they will ask to be indeed around the table, which for me is fine because I can testify that they can bring a lot. However, there are two important things, which is first, the definition of the unmet needs, especially the urgent unmet needs. For me, these are questions related to public health, and this is the responsibility of the public sector to say, okay, we will invest, but we will invest in these key priorities. Obviously, we will do it with you. That's point number one. Point number two, in the partnership, if we clearly mention that the goal is to deliver new products on the market reaching the patients, which has not been the case with IMI because it was always said that it's a pre-competitive organization. And I think that this should change. Actually, it has to some extent changed over time, especially if we think about antibiotics. And I think that there should be a conversation about this, because if we agree that this is the goal, we should also agree on the conditions under which the new products will be accessible, and to make sure they are affordable, and also to make sure that in the pricing policies, the fact that there has been a huge public investment is considered. And there again, we need more, we need this conversation, we need more transparency. Probably transparency cannot be.
I want to challenge you a bit. Will this fly with the industry? Will this fly? Because also Marie-Paul started today by saying, you know, if we hadn't had the US investment, where would we be today? So I think if we attach these sort of conditionalities, this sort of public scrutiny, as Marie-Paul put it before, why would the industry bother to team up with HERA? What is your answer to that, looking ahead?
I think that's a very important and critical question. And really the point is that companies are global by definition. We are Europe. And it's there that that's the situation, but that's also a problem in terms of it puts us in a weaker situation. And I always explain, because I had many contacts, and you know, there are really wonderful people in the pharma industry. And it's true that several of them have really also a societal concern. So this is completely true. The problem is that if we want to organize the partnership in the right way, we need on the public side people who are probably stronger and more more tough negotiators, if I may say. And I think that what has happened with the advanced procurement is an example of the fact that we can have within the Commission people able to play this game. And I can tell you, pharma industry will understand. Now, it's true that to move forward, we need to discuss, I hope with the new US administration, perhaps with also other countries, Asian countries. That's critical, because otherwise we will not succeed. We have to find a way that Europe is not the weak spot, I would say, yeah. And that's the challenge. But you're right. I think that it should be well prepared.
Yeah, Marie-Paul, the same question to you. Will this fly? And is this, if we have this kind of guarantees for a return, a public return, on this multifaceted and multi-layered public support, will these conditionalities be accepted? And is it a question of Europe flexing its muscles or not?
You know, the issue that I have seen always with BARDA is that, you know, all the decision on investment that, many of the decision investment that I've seen were to the point. I've worked for many years with the previous director of BARDA, Rick Bright, and you know, of course, Rick and his colleagues have had the courage to invest in a broad range of technology, not knowing which one will fail. And of course, when you do this, many fails, but then you need to recognize early that they fail and you need to kill the project. And I think that this investment is worth it and was well done. What has always been a source of concern for me is that there was never any string attached to this investment, which is, for example, when the US have invested and BARDA have invested heavily in the development of a vaccine against, what was it at that time? It wasn't, a vaccine against smallpox, a new vaccine against smallpox, more attenuated. Then they paid for the development. At the end, they paid for the vaccine they had a more expensive price than any other country, because in the US, they are not allowed to negotiate. So I think, you know, there should be, if you put so much money on the table, then I think that there should be also some discussion about affordable pricing, for example, about access for low and middle income countries. And I agree that, you know, in one sense, we have the real BARDA, which is putting a lot of money on the table and asking nothing in terms of strings attached. And it's just, you know, we give you the money and you develop. And when you have a product, you come back to us and then we'll discuss and we'll purchase the product. if this is a competitor and Europe says, "Woohoo, we want to have return for the public sector," then we may have a problem of competition, and industry may want to go rather with the real BARDA than with whatever it will be called in Europe. But if there is enough revenues, I'm sure that industry knows where is their interest, and if we are not trying just to give them scraps and against a lot of conditions, and if we really play the game, but introduce some strings also, I have no doubt that we will find industry willing to partner with us.
Because at the same time, one of the key elements set out, I mean, for the time being, we don't have so much information on HERA, for instance, but I'm sure as we speak in many places around this city, around Brussels, there are a lot of consultancies and other lobbying firms drafting a lot of ideas on behalf of pharma companies on how HERA should be set up, but also operate, and then what it should deliver on. The question is also that from the Commission's perspective, HERA will be established, and it will be there also to strengthen the stance of Europe overall in the innovation landscape worldwide, and to strengthen also the competitiveness of the industry. Therefore, I think there it's a question of, tell me what you think, but I think it's a question of getting the balance right. And do you think that these are goals which are mutually exclusive? For instance, no strings attached in order to strengthen the competitiveness of the sector, or there can still be some questions asked, there's some strings attached, the governance can be or should be mostly public. Do you see these as reconcilable and compatible aspects, or mutually exclusive? Michel, do you want to take this? Yeah, and then also we have questions from the audience, and I do invite our viewers and participants to go ahead and ask their questions. Michel, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, this question of strings attached is very important. Two comments. First, we are mainly talking about large companies. I will come later to other stakeholders. Regarding large companies, what we should avoid if we want to find a way to find a deal is pharma bashing. That's extremely counterproductive. We should acknowledge what they bring, including to public health. And what we should do is to start from their own statements. Look at the business roundtable, these big CEOs, the value-balanced alliance when you have pharma companies. There are also at least one pharma companies engaged in benefit corporation certification. So let's say, okay, you realize yourself and you claim it that you are not there only to please your shareholders. That's the starting point. And I think that if they want to translate this into, concrete behavior and actions, obviously they have to discuss with society, they have to discuss with the public sector. And I would start from this standpoint. Second, string attached is not only for the large companies, and that's, I think, something that was corrected in the new IMI. Healthcare products, that's not only pharmaceuticals, right? You have the devices, you have the diagnostics, you have all these things that you know. And I think that strings attached actually also apply to some publicly funded partners, and I will start by universities. I think that university, and it's not easy to discuss with them because obviously they are running short of money, but I think that they are also partners in the conversation, because obviously the condition they are putting in technology transfer are also an element which reflect in the final price. And obviously there is also these important partners, and this was the question, which are the small, medium-sized enterprise. if we want to be European innovation competitive, for sure, we have to support them, we have to help them, we have to listen to them, but we have also to be sure that's because that's, you know, the usual objective of the investors is to have find a very fruitful exit, and which means to have an agreement usually with a large pharma. And again, I think that along this value chain, the interest of society, of citizens, of patients should be taken into consideration. And I always take this example, which brings us back to the development of HIV drugs, because at some time there has been a reasonable pricing clause in some tech transfer agreement. I will not go into details. And I think that we should really rethink about the way to make sure that along the value chain, we don't, you know, at each step just increase the end price for the customers and for the governments.
So essentially, Michel, you're reminding us that firstly, it is a very diverse innovation ecosystem, and it's not only big pharma, things are not black or white, and we need to look at the landscape with all of its different shades. And secondly, you're referring also to some practices that have been part of the game in the past. So it's not like necessarily we need to reinvent the wheel in terms of this kind of socially responsible pricing or licensing. And of course, that brings me to one of the most successful, I would say, alternative drug development models that we've seen over the past years. DNDi, the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative. For us, civil society experts and advocates in Brussels, we've been advocating for how should I put it, synergies, this symbiosis between the IMI, for instance, and the NDI. And obviously, Marie-Paule, I think you will agree that HERA could be inspired by the practices implemented by the DNDi so far. What would you say?
I fully agree, because all the research that DNDi does actually is through partnership, but it doesn't mean that DNDi is a public-private partnership. DNDi doesn't have any private entity in the governance of the organization, so it is using public money to develop drugs for the public health interest. Likewise, the Medicines Patent Pool is also an organization which is not a public-private partnership. It's a foundation which is helping reduce the cost of generics through competition, but it is publicly driven. There's no financing from industry. So I certainly don't want to diabolize, to paint in black industry. I have very good friends in industry. I have myself worked in industry at one time. But we should remember that if we now have generics which are affordable to treat everybody against HIV, even in the poorest country, it's because there was a big fight. At the beginning, it was only for the rich. And it's civil society, it's not the governments would have helped on that. So I think as I said, they are great people working in industry, but still their objective, their primary, and in principle, it should be even their sole objective, or their sole primary objective, is to bring revenue for their shareholders. That's it. Full stop. Then there's a secondary objective, which is to make medicine, and it's very good. And this is for the reason why we are working with them. So we need to work with them without, on their side and on our side, being naive and trying to see how we can work in the area where the interest overlaps. And this is an important area, and it's a large area. But you asked, whether objectives are irreconcilable.
Okay.
And
or
I
mutually
think
exclusive or mutually reinforcing.
Exclusive. I think what is important is to see there can be several objectives, but you have to say number one is this one and number two is this one. If you say, well, competitivity for the industry is at the same level of as public security, then you enter into a problem. If you say my primary objective is to strengthen health security for European citizens, that's my primary one. And then my secondary one doesn't need to be that it's minor, but it's a secondary one, is to increase competitiveness of the industry. Then you can see how you can reconcile them. But to say it's all equal is likely to be a mess.
Yes, to get the list of priorities, right? We have 5 minutes left. I would like, for the last concluding question, I think we've given a lot of ideas to our viewers about HERA, and I think this is just the start of the conversation. And us at EPHA, we wanted to start this conversation early, as I'm sure a lot of other stakeholders in this city are doing so as we speak. My last question to both of you would be, zooming out a bit, we are in the end of 2020. Looking at the broader pharma government's dynamic in light of the present pandemic, what would you say? What struck you so far? What are in a nutshell, a bit the positive elements, or perhaps also the negative precedents you see since the start of this pandemic in February, March in Europe, at least? Michel?
Well, my message will be extremely optimistic, because when you see that in less than a year, as Marie-Paul said at the beginning, we have vaccines delivered today, it's just unbelievable. It means that we are able, I'm not sure that the word partnering is the right word, but we are ready to work together to mobilize the collective intelligence when we are facing such a threat. And this has been possible because of open science at the beginning. You know, data were, and starting from the identification of the viral genome, and you know, you have now all these papers published very rapidly, even before peer reviewing, which might be a problem. But by and large, people share and are open. And I think that this is true in academia. It's also true in industry. Actually, they don't have much choice because they are scrutinized, but it worked. And second, it was possible to share risks to accelerate the movement. And third, I would like to insist on this, is that the regulators not only follow the movement, but were imaginative, and they were able to find ways to be part of this incredible rapid development. Now, my wish for the future, and what I think is still lacking, is the better involvement of, you know, the end users, the citizens, the patients. And when we think about the pandemic and what we are facing now, I think that there should be a much more in-depth conversation with primary caregivers, with general practitioners, with pharmacists, those that in whom public has trust. I think that the main challenge now is, I would say, to restore the trust in all stakeholders, including the industry, of course.
Marie-Paul, concluding words to you.
I think that, you know, there has been a lot of progress in the development of what BARDA calls countermeasures for COVID. First, in the area of diagnostics, and now we really have, you know, a wide array of diagnostics for many applications, which is very good. Because testing is very important. We see that vaccines are coming up. Unfortunately, drugs are still lagging behind, and there's still no efficacious drug against COVID available to treat patients, apart the old dexamethasone, of course. And so there's still progress to be made. So extraordinary progress in very little time. This is a result of a lot of work from many people, including, of course, regulators, but also the industry, academics, governments everywhere. But it's not possible to always work in an emergency. So we need to see how we can when this pandemic will be over and when we will be able to come back to a certain degree to our normal life of before the pandemic, which is not likely to be tomorrow, by the way. In spite of vaccines, we need to see how we can work on preparedness, like the American government had done with BARDA, what characteristics we want to have for our own HERA. I would again put on the table my opinion that it should be a public, permanent organization, which on which the governance is public, to which are appointed people who have the competence to lead such an agency. They may come from industry, but their purpose should be the public benefit. And that in order for it to work, it should be an institution which is well funded, with autonomy, with ability to take decision and to fail. And in addition, that I would strongly think that there should be some strings attached. One of them, for example, should be access for poor people, so that in the contracts would already be sort of written in stone the fact that if the industry is not capable of providing the new countermeasure at affordable cost to the low-income country, there should be an obligation of giving out licenses, which actually, you know, if an industry is not willing to exploit in low-income country anyway, so why not give a license? And things like that, that would really show that this is to the benefit, this is public money for the benefits of public health.
Wonderful. Thank you to both of you. Thank you, Marie-Paule. Thank you, Michel, for being very concrete and crystal clear. To our viewers, this is the final edition for 2020. We'll be back next year with possibly as well a podcast. May I wish everyone happy holidays, Merry Christmas, depending on your religious beliefs, and see you next year. And you can always watch our Access to Medicine Dialogues on the EPHA YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I know you're both very busy people. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Yanis. It was
Bye-bye.
a pleasure. Thanks, Michel.
Thank you to everyone.